My name is Stretto. Welcome to episode 6 of Pink Elephant Foxtrot, Beacon. On this episode, we introduce two new recurring segments. In England, they call bullhorns loud hailers. Loud Hailer will examine the pink elephants of technology, politics, and other important topics. This first episode is culled from the book version of Storyboard of a Dream and centers on Silicon Valley and the rise of big tech. It is called We Are Building a Religion. My religious education has many gaps in it, but I do remember that bit about the Ten Commandments. Maybe it's because I watched the 1956 Cecil B. DeMille movie version at least 20 times throughout my childhood. My friends and I were in it for the scene with the parting of the Red Sea. Now that's what I call special effects. Treating each window of Storyboard of a Dream as a Rorschach test took a complete surrender of rational thought. A temporary naked lunch, if you will, but perhaps not as naked as Victor Hugo, who would instruct his servants to hide his clothes so he couldn't leave the house. It was while I was in this zone that I telepathically received the Steve Jobs rewrite of Moses' descent from the Mount. Instead of a golden calf on an altar, what if what was being worshipped was a giant silicon integrated circuit? Would Moses have smashed the tablets containing the Ten Commandments, or would they currently be in Bill Gates' safe next to his Da Vinci Codex? Silicon chips have found their way not only into computers, but into every possible electronic device imaginable. They are so ubiquitous today that I find myself asking, was there really a time before digital toasters? I have a faint memory of the analog ones from the 70s working just fine, but maybe that was just a dream from a different storyboard. Our addiction to needless functionality, as well as the irresistible lure of search engines and social media, has distracted us from the fact that large, powerful corporations are able to spy on us and influence us in a manner unimagined, even by George Orwell. In 2017, WeVibe, the makers of a Bluetooth-controlled vibrator, paid $3.75 million to consumers who discovered that the company was collecting data not only on when the device was used, but on how it was used. This wasn't an accident. Chips don't program themselves, but what programmers do is a mystery to most other members of society, sort of like artists, except for the fact that programmers are paid in stock options worth multiple millions of dollars. It started out more modestly, though. The peninsula south of San Francisco got christened Silicon Valley in the 1970s, but the computer revolution began years earlier. One night, when I was visiting friends in Palo Alto, I went out for a walk with my dog and discovered a plaque outside a house that wouldn't inspire a second glance otherwise. In 1939, entrepreneurs Bill Hewlett and David Packard started the information technology revolution in a garage at 367 Addison Avenue in Palo Alto. Their first product had nothing to do with computers, though. They developed a cheaper way to manufacture sound oscillators, and Walt Disney's film Fantasia was their first big break. Several other audio-related products were soon to follow. Had Hewlett-Packard continued down the same path and focused on audio research, they could have become the Dolby of their day. But they changed direction drastically. Together with IBM, they would reign supreme in information technology until a second apocryphal story involving a peninsula garage was born. 40 years later, at 2066 Crist Drive in Los Altos, legend has it that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak built their first motherboards for Apple Computer in Jobs' parents' garage. Wozniak later admitted that they got nothing done in the garage per se, but that their first office was indeed Jobs' bedroom. For someone who saw the transition from analog to digital, it is hard to describe how life-changing the computer revolution was. It changed everything, and these two visionaries were literally ground zero. Unlike IBM and Hewlett-Packard, they put the personal in personal computer. The Macintosh, released in 1984, was the first commercially available personal computer to combine a point-and-click mouse with the concept of a graphic user interface, key features that Steve Jobs appropriated from Xerox. It caused a revolution from which there was no turning back, and the knockoffs began immediately. Bill Gates borrowed the same graphic user interface for Windows that Jobs had borrowed from Xerox, and Windows became the Big Mac of operating systems. It was sort of like Pat Boone's version of Little Richard's Tutti Frutti. Gates kept enough for Windows to be recognized as the original version, but otherwise it was completely deflavorized. Now that everyone owned a computer, it seemed the next logical step was to somehow connect them all together into a large network. Looking back, it all seems so utopian. What could possibly go wrong? On April 30th, 1993, the source code for the World Wide Web was released by Tim Berners-Lee. Within a year, people had the content of hundreds of libraries at their fingertips, but searching for anything was next to impossible because nothing was indexed. By 1996, that had all changed. Lycos became the first search engine company to go public on the NASDAQ, valued at an unheard of $300 million after its first day. Yahoo was not very far behind and went public that same year, ending its first day with a record-breaking valuation of $848 million. The tech industry was a generation or two after the primordial video game Pac-Man, but know it or not, they used it as their business model. Gobbling up companies became their obsession, and they absorbed businesses, products, and huge chunks of real estate left and right, transforming into the Borg from Star Trek. Money was no option, resistance was futile, and competition, privacy, affordable housing, and freedom of choice vanished. Multimillionaires were made overnight. They all started buying houses throughout the Bay Area, paid for in cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars above asking price. They were building a religion, ushered into Fort Knox like Andy Warhol over the velvet rope at Studio 54. And now, Culture Crunch, a new recurring segment that explores the many pink elephants in culture, society, and the arts. This first installment is taken from a chapter of the book version of Storyboard of a Dream, and focuses on the universal message within Johann Sebastian Bach's Chaconne for solo violin. It is called Recapitulation? We don't need no stinking recapitulation. In Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, James Joyce observed that the most universal works of art begin with an artist's relentless inner journey. Songwriters such as Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, and Nick Drake have accomplished Joyce's loop, their lyrics so highly personal that they transcended their creators to resonate freely. But is it possible for an artist to translate and universalize the human experience, all of its sorrows and joys, solely in one piece of instrumental music? It is difficult to know exactly what Johann Sebastian Bach, who lived from 1685 to 1750, was feeling or thinking when he composed the Chaconne, a 20-minute piece for solo violin spun from a single chord progression. Like Da Vinci and the Mona Lisa, Bach may not have purposefully set out to create something so profound when he wrote the Chaconne. Nonetheless, there clearly had to be an inner journey involved in the creation of this incomprehensibly perfect work. The Bach Chaconne encompasses, above all, an experiential understanding of the human condition, an empathy that we have lost touch with as a species, and that can only have been acquired through deep observation and introspection on the part of its creator. Bach absorbed and reflected back the prism of our shared experience as human beings. To put it another way, he had to have lived the Chaconne manyfold before he wrote it. And every musician who has ever played the Chaconne has had to go through their own intrepid inner journey in order to extract and reflect this emotional prism from the page. Is Bach Rollo May's ultimate soothsayer? Was one life enough to write something so profound? This singular, technically demanding piece is so enlightened and unparalleled that it seems as if Bach had 9 lives to draw on. The composer Johannes Brahms said it best. For a small instrument, the man writes a whole world of the deepest thoughts and most powerful feelings. If I imagined that I could have created, even conceived the piece, I am quite certain that the excess of excitement and earth-shattering experience would have driven me out of my mind. A chaconne is a set of variations based on a short chord progression. The first 8 measures of the Bach chaconne constitute the actual chaconne and form the basis for a staggering number of increasingly difficult variations. I'm playing it on viola because, well, desperate times call for desperate measures. Several of the chords of the chaconne contain tritones, an interval so dissonant that in the Middle Ages the Church called it diabolus in musica, the devil in music. Bach was well aware of the history of this interval, and I believe his use of it in the opening of the chaconne is calculated and purposeful. The second and third chords each have a tritone in the second chord between the upper two notes, in the third chord between the lower two notes. Because the bridge of the violin is arch-shaped rather than flat like a guitar, 3- and 4-note chords must be rolled across the strings with the bow from lowest note to highest note, and as a result, these two tritones get played in rapid succession. The dissonance of these consecutive tritones and the way Bach voices them so that they occur in different registers is softened by the other notes contained in the same chords. In each case, the tritones are combined with consonant intervals, a fourth on the bottom of the second chord, and a fifth on top of the next chord. The combination of dissonance and wide-open consonants in each of these chords creates an inexplicable tension and release from the very beginning of the piece. This 8-measure genome of the human experience, brimming with bold dissonance, voiced in a manner that arrests as it consoles, is the ultimate common denominator. Like the chaconne, life on earth is beautiful and ugly, happy and sad, comforting and cruel. And eventually, it ends as complexly and mysteriously as it began. It is not easy for anyone, rich or poor, king or commoner. We are all equal because we all share the same double helix, the same existential struggle, and the same fate. It is as if Bach is telling us that empathy, based on our shared precarious human condition, is the best investment we have for when those tritones come knocking. And they will come knocking. There is a terrifying moment in the chaconne that occurs right before Bach modulates from the storm and stress of a minor key to the peace and optimism of a major key. Before Bach opens that window of hope, he recapitulates the chaconne in full force, voiced in a higher, more shrill register, drawn out, transformed with insistence and pleading, descending notes driving us downwards towards an uncertain fate. It is as if we are meeting our demons and obstacles head-on this time as a species, and they are rising on their toes to push back. Does any of this sound familiar? If it is one message I have come away with after documenting the psychic component to the UAP experience, it is that as a species, we cannot afford any more recapitulations. There is a beacon, and we must move towards it. It is the major key melody that Pied Piper visitors to this planet have been whistling for millennia, and it is time we learn how to harmonize. When Bach returns to a minor key at the end of the chaconne, he reminds us just how precious and fleeting life is. In the end, when we leave this place, we all must face the minor key of our ultimate journey. But the last note of that journey is not one we have to face alone. Bach indicates that the final note of the chaconne be played as a double unison, a pitch that is both fingered and sounded with an open string at the same time. It seems as if he was saving the most important message for last. For many voices, one note. Thanks for tuning in to episode 6 of Pink Elephant Foxtrot. Please help the show grow by hitting that subscribe button. Music was by Johann Sebastian Bach. Coming up on Episode 7, Sleeper Wave. Did you ever turn your back on the ocean long enough to get hit by a sleeper wave? On Episode 7 of Pink Elephant Foxtrot, we take a look at the cultural tsunami that occurred when the Beatles landed in America. Don't miss it.